My name is Maniza Naqvi, and this is the 22nd episode of the Little Book Company podcast. Today, I am in conversation with Fawzia Afzal-Khan. Fawzia is a university distinguished scholar and a professor of English at Montclair State University in New Jersey. She is a talented, trained singer, and she is a writer and an activist. She has made an award-winning short documentary film on Pakistani women singers. She is the author of 6 books, including a memoir on growing up in Lahore. Her book, Siren Song, Understanding Pakistan Through Its Women Singers, was published by OUP in 2021. Her latest book, Traveling Feminista, is published as an ebook by the Little Book Company. She loves to sing, act, and play with her grandkids, and use her art in service of progressive social and political change. Welcome, Fawzia.
That was a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much, Maniza, for having me on. It's an honor.
Thank you, Fawzia, for all you do. There is so much to talk to you about. I don't know where to begin, except to begin right in the moment. You have just returned from Lahore. Shall we talk about what you did in Lahore, or shall we talk about what you immediately started to do on arrival back in the US?
Oh, well, the in a way, it's all connected, isn't it? And part of what I was doing in Lahore, along with, yes, indulging my passion for song and theater and all that, but even the play that I did, that I co-wrote with Shahid Nadeem of Ajoka, and which I was so happy and proud that we were able to hold the very first dramatic or staged reading of it, play about T.E. Lawrence of England, who was in our part of the world, i.e. South Asia, at the turn of the last century, or rather right after World War One. That play also is connected with what I was doing, I feel, when I got back here, which is to say, calling attention, right, to the really terrible history of colonial and now imperial history, and the effects that that has had throughout the world, and particularly on countries that are now referred to as the global south. When I was young, growing up in Pakistan before I came here to the US, we called it the third world. Mm-hmm. Now it is called the Global South, and Pakistan, certainly the country of my birth, is part of that. Mm-hmm. And as is Palestine, right? And so in that play that I was able to write and to stage this time in Pakistan, one of the things I did, plus many talks that I also gave at a variety of campuses in Lahore as well as in Islamabad, they were focused on what is indeed going on and has been going on and is in the public consciousness since last October, which is really the unfolding and the continuing genocide of the Palestinian peoples in Gaza in particular. But this is something that we know has been building for the last over really a century now, not even just the 75 years since the creation of Israel, but prior to that, the plan to drive out and kill off the local population so that others can take over and establish their own country there. And this has been the history of colonialism and imperialism. And so, yes, when I came back, getting involved with student encampments, people have really woken up to all these injustices, right, committed in the name of, let us civilize the rest of the world. And that has been something that has been a very, very driving concern and passion of mine in the pursuit of social and economic justice.
It certainly has. So tell us how you actually dealt with the story of T. Lawrence.
Sure, happy to do that. So, I, like many people of my generation, we grew up on a lot of these colonial and imperialist myths. and we often bought them, and we loved the very people and the very countries who were involved in creating a world system that where the great game was being played out by Western nations at the expense of people like us, brown and black people like us. But for many of us growing up in that era, during the 60s and 70s, we were fed on fabulous epic films like Lawrence of Arabia. Maniza, I don't know if you're younger than I am, so I'm not sure it was the same for you, but I imagine that you also were very aware of the impact of a film like that by David Lean. And
Oh, of course.
right. And so we all grew up thinking, oh my God, Lawrence, he was our hero, and he saved, and he was on the side of the Arabs, and, against his own government's machinations and all of that. And then, obviously one grows up, and, I'm a post-colonial studies scholar, and I became very interested, some time ago in what was actually going on at, right after or during leading up to World War One and between the two world wars, when the world was, really undergoing massive change. And a lot of the colonial empires of Britain and France and so on were being challenged by people that they had been controlling, including people like us, people of the Indian subcontinent, right? And all over Africa and Middle East and so on. And so I sort of became aware also of a story that, Tariq Ali, historian of South Asia, who has been, who lives in Britain, and he has written a great deal about many of these topics that are of concern to myself, to people like us. And I came across this story about Lawrence, that he had, discovered or come across, and he was sharing. And I found it fascinating about T.E. Lawrence sort of showing up in our part of the world, after he had done all of the, participated in the breakup of Palestine and the breakup, and sort of really dividing Arabs instead of uniting them. And this led to the creation of a lot of these nation states in the so-called Middle East, the Arab Middle East, which pitted one tribe against another, pitted peoples against another. And we see the problems that that has created, including the creation of the State of Israel. And we see all of that playing out right today. So much before what is happening today happened, I came across this story about his shenanigans in South Asia. And I wanted to write that story because in a way he was responsible, according to Tariq Ali and others, that we know that he was posted, or he sought a posting, in Pakistan, in what became Pakistan later, and on the border with Afghanistan, and that he was involved possibly in the overthrow of the very secular Afghan king, King Amanullah at the time, who was very progressive. And that was not something that Britain wanted. They did not want a secular progressive king there. Because they were afraid that he was aligned or could be aligned, because he had left progressive politics, with the Soviet Union, that was, a power to be contended with. And they wanted to defeat and keep the Soviet Union out of that region, so that it could be an area that Britain could influence, and it was already afraid that the empire in India was going to break up. So they needed to make sure that they kept their foothold there. And there was the story of, Lawrence also supposedly marrying or falling in love with the young Kashmiri woman who was the daughter of a Harry Nidu and his mother, who ran this famous hotel called the Hotel Nidu in Lahore, which is the city of my birth. And I wanted to tell that story because later on, the woman that he supposedly married, we don't know if that is truth or fiction, but it made a great, play. And she later on became the first lady of Kashmir and played an important role in sort of Kashmiri rights, and especially women's rights, and so on, post partition and post independence of India and Pakistan, even though, of course, we know Kashmir is still suffering in the very same similar ways to what is happening in what used to be Palestine. So I wanted to tell that story because I saw that it was connected, this idea of the great game and the influence of the West. It was connected to what is happening and unfolding in the Middle East, which has been a passion of mine. I've been a follower of, and somebody who has taught throughout my almost 40-year career now, about Palestine. I have taken up that struggle from the moment actually I arrived on the shores of the US. Even as a graduate student, I was somebody who decided with a few other students on campus that it was very necessary to found a information committee on Palestine to educate students who had no idea that such historical injustice had been perpetrated against Palestinians. And the only narrative that was that people knew and that was even allowed or permitted on campuses at that time, and we see that even today, was the Zionist narrative. So in this play, I wanted to bring together all of these things, the Zionist narrative, the fight against that, the fight for Indian independence. We even have Bhagat Singh showing up at one point in the Hotel Needu. And I also had found out about the Arab Hotel, which was a famous hotel, much like the Pakistan Tea House in Lahore, which has unfortunately since been demolished. But it was very much there, and it was a place where a lot of our progressive writers, left-leaning socialist writers and poets used to gather, as they used to in the Pakistan Tea House. And I wanted to bring together these two sites, on the one hand, Needu's hotel, where Kashmiri, these were Kashmiri insurgents and what was happening over there, together with the fight for trying for Arab independence and Arab rights, which, they knew they were losing at the hands of the British, and where they felt they realized they were being betrayed by someone like Lawrence. That is a history that I feel very few people know, that hasn't really been discussed much, and to tell it through a play that could also be entertaining, but with this strong political message of how this great game just continues to be played at the expense of the majority of the world's population. That was the story I wanted to tell. And I'm very happy that Shahid agreed to work with me on this play. He's a wonderful playwright, and he brought a lot to the project. And the two of us, over many years now, have sat down whenever we could to hammer it out. So it was very exciting to put this on, and it really got a very, very good reception. I mean, we had standing room only, Maniza. I mean, we didn't expect so many people to show up, and it was amazing. And people stood for like an hour and a half of a historical play, and without making a sound in that auditorium in Lahore, in the Lawrence form, what was formerly called the Lawrence Hall. We thought that was very cool, even though it's a different Lawrence, but we wanted to hold it there. And we had very good comments from people like Naveed Shahzad and Shaista Sirajuddin. And, so it was just a really, really wonderful thing that we were able to pull it off, and we, found marvelous actors, including from some universities like Government College, and it was just wonderful to work with these young people and to teach them a bit about this history, because people don't know this alternative history from below.
Two questions. One, you said that this is not the same Lawrence as Lawrence Hall and Lawrence Gardens. And
right.
The second question is, when you mentioned an Arab gathering place in Lahore, or like a tea house, which one are you referring to? What is the name of that?
It was simply called The Arab Hotel, that was the name. It was called the Arab Hotel, and it used to exist across from Islamia College for Men railway lines. So I've actually visited the site many years ago when I was just starting to think about this play. And, then I also, the site of the Nidu Hotel was what is now the Avari Hotel, which, everybody knows it is often the site of the Lahore Literary Festival. It also was the place where I got married ages ago. So it was very interesting to me to know that it is there that the famous Nidu's Hotel stood. And then I did go on a sort of a walking tour with somebody I know who knows old Lahore. And we visited that site where the Arab Hotel once stood. And it was called the Arab Hotel. And it was actually founded and run by two brothers from Kuwait who had apparently Palestinian roots, because we know that Palestinians sort of went off in a lot of these areas which weren't even countries at one point, and they lived there. So these two brothers we know were Kuwaiti / Palestinian, and that they founded and they lived in Lahore, and they ran that hotel for a very long time in the early and middle part of that of the last century of the 20th century. So I also, for me, of course, and I'm sure somebody who grew up on films like also Casablanca, which is all about the resistance against fascism. And I thought it would be great to use locations like these two locations, locations of two hotels, which are the gathering place of spies and agents provocateurs and people, with obviously working at cross purposes, but some that are fighting for the independence of their people, others who are coming in to, create dissension like Lawrence. And others. I thought it would be really kind of fun, and also, have our South Asian sort of song and dance and music, which we have, in both of these scenes. And so I wanted to create a kind of South Asian Casablanca, as it were.
I see. And I can imagine if you're involved, you're going to want to, having written this, you're going to want to sing. But you haven't answered my question about, do you know who Lawrence Hall or Lawrence Gardens?
I did. I forget his first name, but he was somebody, his name was Lawrence, and he was a representative of the British government at that time. He did something for the Brits. He was there in India. I don't know the details, unfortunately, and I should, but it is named. So the entire garden, it was called Lawrence Gardens, which is now called Bagh-e-Jinnah. Post-partition, and Lawrence Hall is now Jinnah Library. But that particular Lawrence was a colonial administrator, let's put it that way.
And I just want to make a small correction. The Lahore Literature Festival is held in Alhambra Arts Council, but
it has been for many, many years. But I know that in the past, there have been occasions when it was held for a variety of reasons. I think when Alhambra couldn't host them because there was some problem there or some attack, so-called, because I remember being in Lahore, and this is going back several years. So once or twice, the Avari Hilton has been the site of the LLF. But yes, you're right. In the recent years, it's been, and traditionally, it's been at the Alhambra, yes.
Yes, 1 year it was held in Avari. And
1 year, okay.
Now you are back in the US, and what are you doing?
Well, I've become, I have been even, ever since October, really, I've been very, very active on my own campus, which is Montclair State in New Jersey, and in trying to raise awareness about the what has been going on in Gaza, the genocide, the killing, the maiming, now the famine. And I, along with really only just a handful, literally 2 or 3 other people who have been vocal on our campus listserv, which exists in order for faculty and staff to communicate with each other about, a variety of things. And it is an open forum for discussion, and it is part of our, we exercise our First Amendment rights there. So that is what we have been doing. And, the two or three of us, actually, also the other two from my own department, English, who have been very vocal in posting alternative, to counter, the really pathetically one-sided reporting that has been going on in mainstream US and other Western media. We've been countering that from, material and reporting from outlets like Al Jazeera, or very occasionally The Guardian, certainly The Intercept, and so on and so forth. And we have been badly attacked by some of the other faculty. We have been accused, as you can imagine, of being anti-Semitic. I mean, we have held very calm, and all we've done is post, nothing but facts and figures. And we now are shut down. So I've come back to an increasingly repressive environment. It was bad when I left, but, I had been going to all of the protests that were being organized in New York City, participating in them, singing at some of them, actually, in Times Square and so on. But I have come back now to what we see is happening on US campuses ever since student encampments have been, these are the sites of peaceful protests in areas that are designated for students to gather peacefully and protest. And we are seeing that they are being attacked. I mean, in places so shamefully, like Columbia and NYU, NYPD, and troopers being called in by the administration to attack their own students and the faculty who are protecting them. I mean, this is, beyond astonishing. So I came back and I found out that the very first student encampment in Westchester County in New York, where I live, was about to take place. So obviously, I decided that I would go there to support them, which is what I did, and only to be chased off by the cops. I mean, I held my own, as did some of the other local community members who were there. But despite our telling them, and saying, where does it say so? I mean, we are community members. We are here merely to record. We are not doing anything. And, this is state land. This is public property. This is the State University of New York. I mean, we have a right to be here, but we were told that we would be arrested if we didn't shove off. So after taking some photographs and cheering on the students and, leaving some supplies for them, eventually I left, as did others. And sure enough, later on that evening, there were arrests and students were manhandled. There are pictures of them being, shoved to the ground and being, handcuffed and arrested and led away. I mean, if this is not veering towards fascism, I don't know what is. I mean, and these were, I can tell you, because I was there was literally a handful of students sitting quietly in, and the only thing they started to do was to raise the slogans, Palestine will be free. They were just sitting on the ground. They were not disturbing anybody. They were not, taking over any buildings. They were not inciting any kind of violence. They were just sitting there chanting their slogans for freedom. And the cops were there it was insane, because there were cop cars and, surrounding this encampment. It made absolutely no sense. I mean, it was so out of proportion. And now, I plan to go. I've signed up to be a marshal at Rutgers, and I'll be there at the Newark campus. And I'm also now trying to figure out what we can do at Montclair, in terms at least of tabling and providing some information and pamphlets about the history and what's going on. But because every space has been shut down. The administration is putting so many roadblocks, Maniza, in our way to just prevent us from open communication. We cannot post. Imagine. We can't post unless we go through some owners, quote unquote, who are affiliated with the dean's office. And so you can imagine that there is no free communication where we can post anything.
Yeah, the First Amendment is being torn apart for this, and this is really quite an astonishing and dangerous time in the United States. Of course, it is an awful time in Palestine, but it is definitely a dangerous time. And as you said, Fawzia, everything is so linked, whether it was T.E. Lawrence at the beginning of the 20th century, Gertrude Bell in Iraq, or the Balfour Declaration, and all the divisions that were sown and created, and the false narratives, and the big screen narrative of Lawrence of Arabia by David Lean. Everything is connected to this moment that we are in. But finally, these students have broken through to the consciousness of America, and maybe America has woken up. Do you think you will be performing your play here?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for bringing all of these points together, Maniza. You really just said it in a nutshell. And I want to second your sense that, and this is something that I can tell you, having sort of been in academia for the past 40 years here in the US, that I've never, ever in my life seen this kind of breaking through, as you put it, and breaking down really of a dominant state narrative, which has been entirely pro-Zionist. And to see students, including so many of my wonderful Jewish students, breaking with that narrative and, being brave and taking on their own community and their own parents. And, it has been extremely encouraging. And I think you're right. I have hope as well. I think this is a turning point, and hopefully it will lead to some real change before too much damage here is done. I mean, in Gaza, it's a whole other story, but I'm really hoping that all of those sacrifices won't be in vain. And so then coming to your question regarding the play here, absolutely. I have actually, you mentioned Gertrude Bell, and I did teach a course last fall, a graduate seminar called Spies of Empire, Empire of Spies, in which I brought together the writings and the life stories of people like T.E. Lawrence and Gertrude Bell, and also another British officer, spy, writer called Freya Dame. She was, sort of given this OBE by the Queen, of course, later in her life, Dame Freya Stark, and a French Russian character called Isabella Eberhardt. And so I taught all four of them in this seminar to expose the links often between ethnography, archaeology as a discipline, because all of these people that I mentioned were, in a manner of speaking, they were archaeologists, and they were all fascinated by the desert, by the Arabs, by the Arab lands, and they all went off there to travel, right? Which is really my passion, the idea of traveling, which has been so close to those of us who haven't had the wherewithal, the training, the independence, especially women, to go off and explore the world. But these women, even growing up in Victorian Britain, were able to do all this. And they went off and they used their charm and their smarts and all that really for the service of empire. They kind of, they plotted lands, they came up with mapping, and that material and that kind of gaze proved very useful to the aims of empire later on, to their own governments. And certainly Gertrude Bell, as you well know, became the woman who was, one of the creators of the borders of what we call now modern Iraq. And so when I taught this course, one of the things that my students and I did was to perform a reading for my colleagues and for other students in other classes of this play. And we actually beamed up we zoomed up Shahid from Lahore and a few other colleagues who are interested in this material from other universities like NYU and so on. And so we had a very nice, that was a really great experience. But now, of course, having done a much more elaborate staged reading in Pakistan, I would love, love, love to be able to do something, at that sort of level, grander level here. And so now it's a question of figuring out where, when, and how. But I do think it should be done because it really does speak to the moment that we are in, the historical moment. I mean, the play is uncanny. I mean, when I started writing it, I didn't think it would end up becoming so relevant, but it really is. And I think it would be very good for audiences here to see it. So I'm hopeful, Maniza.
And the play is called Lawrence in Lahore, The Lost Years.
That is correct. And the lost years, because of course, these are years in Lawrence's life that people, and certainly the history books, don't mention and have not written about. It is a side of Lawrence, of his activities that very few people know about. And it is important that people find out about it, because then it adds to our understanding of this character, who was a very complex man. I mean, my aim in writing this play was not to, just show him as, in any kind of one, through one light, or and just castigate him. That was not the aim at all. It was to show that, he had multiple facets, which is why he remains so fascinating to so many of us, as were these other spies. They were brilliant, they were courageous, they sort of fought against many of the strictures of their own, especially the women of their patriarchal and, imperialist sort of nations. But in the end, you see, Maniza, they did stand up, and they allowed themselves to work for the aims of their own governments and their own governments, which were really governments that wanted or believed in their own noblesse oblige missions of supposedly going out there to civilize those savage Arabs or those savage South Asians or Muslims or Black people or brown people. And in the end, unfortunately, that is the aim that they all ended up upholding, despite their very real love, which I think most of these so-called spies developed for the people amidst whom they spent many, many years. So they are complicated characters, and Lawrence certainly was a complex man. And I want to add to that complexity through this play, and to sort of bring him into the 21st century, so that we can once again see, right, much more clearly perhaps than ever before, sort of the legacy of empire and how it continues to morph and into the different phases that we are going through today.
Yes.
And then so that we can challenge it, right? If you don't understand history, how are you going to challenge it? You will believe what people in power want you to believe. And that is why this moment is so exciting, because now, as you just mentioned also earlier, these young people, especially the students in America and elsewhere, they've woken up. They are saying this is not, we don't believe the historical narrative that has been, rammed down our throat for so long. There is another history here that we need to highlight.
Right. So, Fawzia, let's take a break here. Let's take a pause, and we'll come right back and continue our conversation.
Sure thing, Maniza.
So, Fawzia, I want to continue our conversation. You're so multifaceted, and you've written a book called Siren Song: Understanding Pakistan Through Its Women Singers, and you have also made a documentary about award-winning singers from Pakistan. And you are a singer yourself. So shall we talk about the books first, or shall I ask you to, or should I request you more to grace us with a song?
Well, you don't have to twist my arm to sing. But I think maybe that is something we can end with. That's probably a good way to close out your session. I don't know. It's up to you, really. I'm happy to do whatever you think makes the most sense.
Okay, so let's talk about your books.
Sure.
So, Siren Song.
Yep. Siren Song. They really, when I was thinking of the title, Maniza, I was very, I wanted something that indicated sort of the myth, the mythos of these female singers. They've always fascinated me, their role and their status in Pakistani society, sort of looked at, professional women singers particularly, looked at askance by a very sort of patriarchal society that both enjoys music so much and has enjoyed a lot of the work of, the songs and the personalities of our biggest and most famous female singers like Noor Jahan, or especially Madame Noor Jahan, Malika Pukhraj, Reshma, etc., of that generation, and at the same time, looked down at them. And for me, this contradiction was something that I wanted to really explore in the book and and challenge. And so that was and that was sort of also what the film came first and the book later, because I had sort of come across an opportunity which I had applied for from the NEH, the National Endowment of Humanities, and I managed to get a grant to bring a filmmaker and a scholar together to create a film that could bridge cultures, as it was. So, I thought that a film like this that could also maybe look at music from, in the Pakistani diaspora, but, could be woven into the film. And that is how I wrote the grant. And I was obviously, I lucked out and I got the grant. These are not easy to get, but I was happy that I got it. And with that grant funding, essentially, then I hired, so Mehreen Jabbar from Pakistan helped sort of film a lot of the footage that then later on was cut and edited by a few other sort of filmmakers / editors here. And I ended up making a number of different shortcuts, what we call cuts in film language, right? And they then I entered them into for competitive film, documentary film festivals and so on. And yes, they a couple of these shortcuts made it to they were recognized by audience awards and best foreign film documentary and so on and so forth in some of them. So that was really very encouraging. But unfortunately, it just never made it into a full-fledged, full-length, let's say 60 to 90-minute documentary. That was just, I tried, but it was harder to pull off. And I think at that point, it became clear to me that what I was interested in was to tell a history of Pakistan. Through its women singers, through their trials, tribulations, as well as personal triumphs and tragedies. And but the canvas was larger, right? And I wanted it not to be a sort of a personal story driven narrative that highlighted only one singer or two at most. And that was the advice I was getting from the granting agency and people who sit on those boards. Oh, well, we want to just see one singer and what all difficulties or obstacles she has gone through. You know, a very typical kind of way that I think a lot of this storytelling happens. And that just wasn't my interest. So unfortunately, the larger thing never happened. But I ended up then writing the book, which is, I said, okay, well, then I can do this in a book. And that's what that book is about. It has a number of different chapters, each focused on a separate or one singer. But the idea was to sort of bring them together into this shared analytic or critical socio-cultural, socio-historical space where their personal lives are linked with the history of their time and era in that part of the world. And that is what I chose to do. And then I ended the book with, because I had collected, from several of the singers, I had sat down and had personal conversations and interviews. So I published several of those, as appendices to the book. And I think a lot of people really appreciated that. And the rest of it is really a book that is told from a very kind of feminist theoretical / cultural studies perspective that is looking at the evolution or devolution, if you will, of Pakistan, and how, and the role that these women have played, because people don't tend to think that they were important other than as entertainers. And my argument is that they actually expose the contradictions, the rifts, the problems within the nation state that became Pakistan, and that they are crucially important in trying to understand Pakistan from, as it were, the bottom up. So it's an alternative history, not the history you get from the standard textbooks.
And who are the singers that you have covered other than Noor Jahan, Malka Pukhraj, and
Reshma? So they all get. They have chapters. There is a chapter that actually puts sort of analyzes Noor Jahan, and she shows up in a number of chapters, obviously, because she's so outsized her influence. But there is a chapter on which I entitled the Melody Queen, which was harmonica, and the Muslim Madonna. And so the Muslim Madonna is a reference to Dia Khan, who is a diasporic Pakistani singer who ended up in Norway with her family, and was also somebody who came under attack there by sort of religious extremists, but also, frankly, by the far right, European far right, for what she represented, her music, and so on. So, I kind of connect this sort of growing nexus of religious extremism with far right white supremacist movements, and the role of music in exposing a lot of this kind of sentiment in these places, because I wasn't interested in sort of talking about, well, Pakistan has become so religiously extremist and it's such a bad country and these poor women are such victims. I'm not interested in victim narratives. I'm much more interested in the ways in which these women found they were able, despite those obstacles, to rise, to become amazing singers, to influence and charm and please millions of people, and continue to do so, and connect people who are now in diasporas all over, and we come together, as communities when we listen to these women singing, and to really sort of talk about them as resistors, resistors to state ideologies, resistors to extremist ideologies, and as resistors also to this so-called tolerant West, which has its own issues and imposes its own kinds of barriers and obstacles on people like us, on people from, who are immigrants. So I've done that. That was really
Which
the aim
other,
of the book.
yes, which,
Other singers you asked about, I'm so sorry. I just want to mention. So I also talk about Nazia Hassan, the queen of disco, because I was interested in looking at different genres as well. So from classical, I have Roshanara Begum, a chapter on her, because she was our first and most important singer of classical music. And then some of the new so-called Sufi pop singers like Misha Shafi and so on. So I end with this sort of chapter on Coke Studio and its singers.
did you mention Abida Parveen, or
Yes, yes,
what
of
about,
course, absolutely.
what about Nasibo Lal?
Nasibo Lal, no, I didn't get to Nasibo Lal. I may have mentioned her because I think she's quite important in the ways in which she has, appropriated and then redone Noor Jahan songs and her persona. And I think she's quite she's important in this more contemporary era, and how she has played with things there. So I do think she's important, but
She has a gorgeous
I
voice.
did not get to talk about her much. No.
She has a gorgeous voice, and she connects
Mhm.
people. And I think I just want to maybe, in a conversation with you right now, say that in what you've just said about these women resisting and, moving forward with their singing and their talent, well, they also had people listening. And they very much showed that, with their singing, that it was the vast majority of Pakistan loves music, loves to dance, loves to listen to music, and they are divas because they have people who appreciate them. They would not have
Absolutely.
done without that.
100%. Yeah, you absolutely precisely. And that is the one of the contradictions, right? On the one hand, you have people of all different classes, all different backgrounds, from rural to city to upper to middle to, peasant classes. You're right. I mean, we love music. That is a very South Asian trait. And, when I was filming on the streets of Karachi, I remember we were starting to film for my documentary. I was asking, people just on the streets, in the bazaars in Karachi. I would just go up to them with a microphone and the camera man behind me and just ask, like, who are your favorite singers? And everybody had an opinion. Like, nobody said, oh, I don't listen to music, or I don't know music, and of all different ages and genders and so on. And most of them were like, oh, the real singer, the one that I really adore, from young to old, was saying Madame Noor Jahan. I mean, she still reigns as the melody queen for, from old to young. I mean, it was remarkable. And even this one man that I remember talking to, with a long beard, and he was there, and I asked him, and he says, well, and he named all these singers, and there was a twinkle in his eyes, Maniza, and he was like, oh, I love this singer, but Alhamdulillah, I don't listen to them anymore. I mean, it was such a glaring contradiction in his own words, that on the one hand, it was clear that he was a great lover of music and a lover of these musical women singing, but then this other side of him that had been encouraged to come into being because of this focus on a very narrow kind of understanding and interpretation of Islam, that he had internalized that too, and he didn't want to be seen as somebody who was endorsing the music, even though he had just endorsed it.
Well, that makes
So
very
it was
intense
very funny.
of dealing with it in a public space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What is your favorite form of music that you like to sing?
That's a tough question, Maniza, because, I started out being, when I was training as a sort of a teenager, uh, the music that I wanted to learn, that moved me, that I wanted to be good at, was classical.
Mhm.
And I was being trained in khayal singing, khayal gaiki. So I spent many years developing that, and I just love that. I love the I love the what's the word that I want, the I mean, for me, that was skill, right? It was skill based, and I wanted to learn that skill very badly.
What is
Um,
it? Is it a repetitive singing of a line and singing it and interpreting it in different ways?
yes, exactly. It is in that sense repetitive, but when I say skill based, so what it is it's based on our system of what we call the raga based system, right? Which is just an ocean of notes. And, we have, hundreds of ragas that are, made up of, so one raga will have 5 notes and they will be flat notes. Another will have a mixture of 7, which is, 7 notes like Amen, which is all like sharp notes. Some will have a mixture of flat and sharp. And so, to kind of get to know that and to get to, be at ease in performing these. And there are strictures. I mean, you can't, like a certain rag, you can only use those notes and in a certain order, like, ascending the scale has to be in this way, coming back, no, it has to be in a different way. So you have to learn all that. And you can only do that when you have a really good ustad who is part of a gharana, a house, I mean, I guess the equivalent would be a house, right? But a gharana as in a school of music, a school of interpretation of those classical ragas, because each school interprets ragas slightly differently, or they perform them differently. So my ustad, my first ustad, who was my most important one, Abdul Haq Qureshi Sahab, he was from the Kirana Gharana. So that was also the Gharana to which Roshanara Begum belonged. And I was just in love with her, the way that she sang and the ease with which she could, do paltas. And, she could sing so fast, palta as a form of singing in which you can just use your throat to just ascend and descend in a fraction of a second. And yet each note is so clear. And I thought, oh my God, if only I could learn to sing like that, which of course I never managed. But that is what really excited me. And then when I came here to the United States, I wanted to continue. I never wanted to like just, leave all of that behind. But I started to get exposed to jazz, and I was fascinated by jazz forms because in many ways, the improvisational structure of jazz is so similar to what we do, like in North Indian classical raga khayal gaiki, where you repeat, but you repeat with a difference. You have a kind of a sort of a framework which you have to abide by. I mean, those are the rules of the game, but within that framework you have a lot of freedom to do things or render, let's say, even a melodic phrase or words in different ways, as long as you don't break the rule framework. And that is very similar to the way that jazz operates. So then I started performing with jazz musicians, and I've continued that, as time has permitted. And when I moved to my university, I found a wonderful Cuban jazz player. He did Cuban jazz, and he and I performed together for many, many years. And I keep trying to experiment. And now I do a lot of, East meets West stuff. Or so my taste in music has, now, because it's very hard to keep up with classical music if you're not in training, and I'm not. So for me to say that that is what I want to do now would mean that I would have to give up a lot of things and go back into training in order to really do it some justice. So now I do easier stuff and I quite enjoy it and it gives me pleasure.
Dare I ask, will you sing for us?
No, you don't have to dare. You know that I would do anything you ask me to do, or within reason.
God
And I
knows,
think this is.
Fawzia, you are so daring. I think
You never know. I might exactly. You know that. So, well, I'm happy to uh, sing, maybe a verse from Baba Bulle Shah, who this is actually an interesting story in its own right, because I am, descended from my father's side, from Baba Ghulam Farid, and so I have some mystical antecedents, but was never taught the language of the area of Multan area, where a lot of these mystics hailed from, and so when I was invited, I think this is going back to 87 or 88. I was in Lahore for a while, and I became involved with Joka Theatre Group, and I did a role of a Darvesh woman, a sort of a character out of, sort of who is a Sufi in her own right, and she's sort of at these, at Data Data Sahab. She lives there, and she just dances and just stays there, and she's picked up by Ziaul Haq's goons because they don't want to see a single unattached woman singing and dancing anywhere. And these things did apparently happen. And Shahid had written this play, Shahid Nadeem, with whom I've co-written Lawrence. And so I was asked by the woman who later became his wife, Madia, and she said, no, you have to do this role and you have to sing in it. So I will sing for you because this is also a song of resistance. And when I was invited by the some of theater groups in Manhattan who had put together this fabulous rally to highlight the rounding up and imprisonment and torture of leading theater activists from the Jenin area in the West Bank in Palestine. And this was happening in October, while the world's attention was focused on Gaza. They were going in, a lot of these IDF soldiers, and beating up and people in the West Bank, settlers taking over lands, and they attacked this theater company who I have visited and written about in the book that you published. Actually, one of my pieces is about that, my visit to Palestine. So I felt very personally connected to Jenin. And when they invited me to perform, I said, okay. And I sang this particular song based on a poem by Baba Bulle Shah, 17th century mystic or a Sufi poet. And it is a song of resistance against, a resistance against all manner of power and sort of things that they tell you must do this, and it completely breaks those bounds. And it's also about bringing the lost beloved back. And so the lost beloved is, of course, that which has, which is the land in this case, which is the land from which the, people who belong to the land have been ejected and killed and maimed. So I find it to be a richly symbolic song. It was sung against the Zia regime in the 80s, and today it seems freshly relevant to what is to call attention to the injustices and the oppressions that the Palestinians are facing. So I'll sing you a little bit of that if you like. Is that all right?
Please, very all right.
Okay. So the title in English translated is A Spell, about casting a spell, hopefully to bring justice to the world. Ek tona एक टोड़ा अच्छा गावांगी मैं रुठड़ा यार मनावांगी हाँ मैं रुठड़ा यार मनावांगी ना मैं बेआही ना मैं बेआही ना मैं कवारी बेटा गोद खिडावांगी मैं हाँ, मैं रुठड़ा यार मनावांगी Neither married nor single. I will have a babe to rock in my arms. So this is also a feminist anthem, Maniza.
Oh, Fawzia, that was so beautiful, and I hope that our listeners can hear the range of your voice because you know I'm using rudimentary technology here, so your voice is so powerful that at points I think that the technology couldn't take it, but I still think that but that it has come through, and it was absolutely gorgeous. I was spellbound, really.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, good. That means the spell is working, and we will cast the spell on this world and make it go right again, Maniza. That is what we need. We want these poets. We need them. We need their words of wisdom and encouragement.
And
Um,
you
yeah.
tell me, when were you in Jenin?
I was in Jenin in 2018 or 2019, was it?
Mhm.
2019, I believe. Yeah.
And I was in Jenin when they just shortly after they raised it, when the
Boy.
bulldozers came in 2002 and
Wow.
raised it. And at that time, General Colin Powell thought
Mm.
great moment for that he was putting together a roadmap for a Palestinian state.
Oh my God.
Yes.
What a joke. Terrible. It's a cruel joke, isn't it? Very cruel. And you have done such important work, Maniza. I'm just so honored to be in conversation with you because you've been on the ground in so many of these quote unquote conflict areas, right? I mean, conflict which you have to ask, like, who has created this conflict and why is it still raging, right? I mean, these are such uneven spaces where the power resides
Mhm.
so squarely on one side as opposed to the other. And I know that people like you, through your work prior to when you were with these big institutions like the World Bank, and then also through your writing, you've really sort of highlighted all of the stuff that's been going on there that you have observed firsthand. So it's just wonderful to know people like you, because otherwise one starts to feel so hopeless.
Well, I want to say the same for you, that your work has been so important in your work at the university, at Montclair, and your writing and your singing and your complete fearlessness and courage to sing and protest and raise your voice for all the issues that are so important, and things need to change. Um,
Mhm.
Fawzia. I want this podcast to be about you.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you. Thank you.
and I do also want to maybe at this point also say that, sometimes people like me, we do work we think uh, is for the good, but actually it plays
Mm,
to colonialism and
I know.
in the case of Palestine, I think that for the longest time, institutions, multilateral institutions,
Mhm.
international agencies have just been suppliers to the concentration camp.
Right. Yeah, it's really very disturbing and disheartening because unfortunately, they are located in areas of the world and funded by states and countries whose interests are now nakedly on display. And those interests are not interests of providing justice and peace, but rather, creating more and more conflict zones where the powerless get crushed and those that are in power continue to rule. And all I think we can do, honestly, and is to shine a spotlight on that, right? Because
The spotlight.
ultimately shining the light, right, helps to bring these things to the fore. I mean, that is what we are seeing today. Like I have felt often, my God, we are crying in the wilderness. What is this? But the fact is, when you see what is happening today, not just across US streets and campuses, but across the world, there it is like, oh my God. So,
Once
people
you
that
once you are able to see, you cannot unsee. It's so clear.
exactly.
And also,
And that means that all of this work that one did, that however, it felt, oh my God, what is this? And it's so nothing, or how small those efforts are. The fact is, wo katra katra, right? I mean, drop by drop, all of these voices, all of the work that we've been doing each in our own separate areas, fields, whatever, small, big, whatever, it comes together to create a moment. And that is the message that I feel we need to pass on, especially to the young, who are that you never give up. You cannot give up. You have to believe in, and I have really believed, Maniza, and I continue to believe that in justice, and that the arc of justice, as MLK also said, right? It may be long, but the arc of the universe may be long, but it always bends towards justice.
justice. And also, when I think back to the work that my colleagues and I did, and mainly my
Mhm.
colleagues over years and years, when we look
Mhm.
at reports, we see that we did document everything.
Mm.
Was acted on or not is another issue, but we did highlight everything that was going on.
Amazing, amazing. And that is so important because those documents exist. They are there in the archives. That knowledge is there. You have documented. And that is crucial because without documentation, you have no evidence. And
Exactly.
if you don't have the evidence, then nobody, generations coming after you, cannot go back and say, this is clearly what happened and this is now what needs to be acted upon. So I think sooner or later that work bears fruit. We just have to,
Keep on,
have the resolve to continue to do it, even in
keep
the
on.
face of seeming inertia, because it's never complete, right? And oppression is never complete. Injustice does not last forever. And we've seen that repeatedly throughout history. And that is honestly what keeps me going, and what it is the message I pass on to my children who, say, oh, well, what's the grand idea? Nothing is changing. But things are changing, Maniza. They always change. They always change.
I totally agree with you. Fawzia, I really want to continue this conversation, but I don't know if you have time for another segment, or shall we close it now?
Well, I have to leave around 2. I don't know what time it is now because I have a.
Yes.
It's only 1:15. We can do another 25 minutes or so if that helps you
So why
and
don't
helps this.
stop here and come right?
Okay.
All right. We'll
All
take
right. I'll do the same thing. Okay. Okay.
So, Fawzia, I do want to talk about your growing up in Lahore and what that was like, especially Kinnaird College, where you were the head girl.
Yes, they senior student or head girl. Yeah, that's what they called it. That was a long time ago, Maniza, but it was. I often feel it was just yesterday because every time I visit Lahore, which is pretty much annually, I do make it a point to give a talk or do some sort of a session with students at and faculty at Kinnaird. So I've stayed very much connected to Kinnaird. It's been an important part of my life, and it was wonderful being there for years that I was. I got very involved with the Dramatic Society, and I remember this wonderful young woman from East Africa who was there, Ulvina Dar, very talented playwright, and we did one of her plays one year and won the Shield because it was declared the best play, that amongst all of the area colleges,
Mhm.
that was a high point. And yeah, I mean, I had wonderful friends. We did music. We did, those were very lively days, and
Who were
felt.
teachers that you remember?
Yes, there were several, and the most important ones were those who taught us, the English lit classes. Ira Hassan, the late Ira Hassan, who unfortunately recently passed on, an absolutely wonderful, wonderful teacher. And then there was also Usha Barkat, who taught us psychology, and we found her to be very open and exciting, and used to hang out with her afterwards outside of class as well. And then the most important for me was Perrin Cooper, who was also English and dramatics, because Perrin used to direct the annual play at Kinnaird, and she was just a wonderful, wonderful person, and just a very talented director. And she actually came to my play, to Lawrence in Lahore, and I was so delighted to see her. And she brought with me, she says, "This is for you." And she handed me a manila envelope, and she says, "You can look at it later." And when I looked at it later and I pulled out what was in there, was this facsimile, like a copy of a letter of something that the principal, the woman who had been principal when I was there, Mira Falbus,
Mhm.
she had written and had given as a speech at the same place in Lawrence Hall
Mhm.
many years ago, when I had a book launch there, um, for my book on called Lahore with Love, growing up with girlfriends,
Mhm.
Pakistani style. So, these things, they just come full circle. It was just really lovely.
Mhm. I seem to remember Perrin Cooper because I only went to Kinnaird College for 1 year, third year. I remember her in her saris and her very tight
Hmm.
juda bun, right? Very proper, very delicate lady.
Yes, yes. And that she's exactly still like that, believe it or not. Yeah,
Then there was
yeah.
a wonderful English literature teacher called Miss Kausar Sheikh. I don't know if you
Oh
remember.
yes, I also wanted to mention a Kausar, Kochi as we called her. She was also wonderful, wonderful teacher, and kind and helpful. So I very much remember Kausar as well, Kausar Sheikh, and also of course Neelam Hussain, who with whom I stayed in touch, and who later ended up becoming very active in the women's rights movement. In Pakistan in the 80s. And she now heads one of these, outfits slash NGOs called Simurg, which documents a lot of this work and, work on behalf of women. And they also publish, and, they've brought out some really beautiful books, including one, on sort of fairy tales and folk tales of the Punjab. Very beautiful coffee table style. So yeah, I mean, I remember her very well, and she gave, in fact, a very nice review she did of my book Siren Song as well. And so it's just lovely to be able to look back and think about these important and wonderful women who clearly influenced all of us, certainly influenced me.
Yes. And then you went on to teach in the United States. You did your PhD in literature, and then you
Mhm.
have been teaching at Montclair State University in New Jersey.
That is correct. Yes, for like I said, since started and I became what we call in our lingo a lifer. you know, I started in the fall of 1987. So that is a very long time ago. That's, about 40 some years. And I've taught in between elsewhere. I've had fellowships like the Fulbright and so on that have taken me back to institutions in Pakistan, including Kinnaird and other places in Lahore. So that has been quite a wonderful experience to be able to, do that and give back in a way to Pakistan and to the institutions that helped me so much
Mhm.
in sort of my own career path. And other institutions. I was at Abu Dhabi, NYU for a couple of years as a visiting professor. But yes, my tenure home has been Montclair State University, and I've had a long and quite distinguished career here. But it hasn't really been all that easy because I'm quite outspoken, and particularly on the matter of Palestinian right of self-determination and criticizing Zionist narratives, and that is never a popular position to take. And so I have had my fair share of obstacles
Mhm.
and people, trying to sabotage my development and the things that are due to
Yes.
due to you. So luckily I did get my tenure because I had already started speaking out. I remember challenging Susan Sontag, who was a
Mhm.
presidential speaker on campus, and that did not go down very well at all. I challenged her on this issue, in fact. But then at that time, I did have people, including in my faculty, who spoke out and wrote in the newspaper, in the student newspaper on my behalf, who protected me.
Fawzia,
Um,
can you speak
yeah,
to the Sontag issue?
sure. I mean, so this is probably in my, I don't know, I would say fourth year, third, fourth year. So I'm still fairly new to campus.
Mhm.
It was certainly before my tenure because you get tenure after the first 7 years. Maybe this was my fifth year, something like that, fourth, fifth year.
Mhm.
But she was on campus, invited as a presidential lecturer. We have one every year, and she was speaking on this idea of the unit of the decade. How do we define decades, and talking in historical and cultural terms. And the decade that she ended up talking about was the decade in which what was happening in the World War, in the Nazi Germany, the Holocaust, and so on, and also the same decade, the 40s, in which, at the end of which, the state of Israel came to be. And, so that was somehow the decade that she focused on, and her examples were from Europe and what was happening and so on there. And so I remember going up, there was a lot of people there from all across campus. I mean, she was very famous, very popular. And I remember coming to, I remember going up to the microphone and saying that, and remember saying or asking that, why did she not, Miss Sontag, why did you not speak about the plight of the Palestinians? Because in the same decade that you have outlined and spoken about with such passion and such clarity, and you talked about, the Holocaust and all of the horrible things that did happen to the population of German Jews and so on. But at the same time that was happening and coming to a close, that decade was coming to a close, there was a new front that was being opened up that was, we have seen since, has created the Nakba, and it created such horrors for the natives of that land, into which, people from Germany came and settled. So you haven't said anything about that, not a word. And, honestly, Maniza, that was like just asking that question. I mean, she started to sort of, it looked like she was about to have like an apoplectic fit on stage. She was just shaking with rage. And I just stared at her thinking, "Ki kya, what's going on?" And she then started pointing to me and said, how dare you, some inane sort of a comment that did not answer or did not even take up the question that I had asked, which I felt was, I had phrased it in a very polite way, but and it was a genuine question.
Mhm.
And she did not answer it, and she just sort of started pointing at me and saying that she was enraged that I should have the temerity to ask such a question. And that was the end of it, and I had to walk off. And I remember afterwards, there were this one particular man that he was sort of in my cohort, and he was at, I think he was in the psychology department or some such, and he came up to me and says, "Aren't you afraid?" And I said, "But why should I be afraid?" I mean, I said, "What should I be afraid of?" His name was Carlos. I remember him. I said, "Carlos, why should I be afraid?" And he said, he's no longer there, so I can say that. I mean, I don't know what happened to him. He left, but the university. But I said, "Why should I be afraid?" And really, why should I have been afraid? I didn't. I mean, this is an academic institution. It's a university campus. We are supposed to have a debate of ideas. I mean, I can't ask. I found that astonishing. But people knew, and those were the days before um, cell phones and all of that. But we did have phones in our little cubicles, and we had answering machines. And I remember getting like inundated with messages from people I did not know. I did not know who they were. Many of them were like staff. They weren't even faculty. They were from, I don't know, this office or that office. And they left me messages saying, "Thank you for saying that. Thank you for bringing that up. We admire you." They wouldn't, I mean, they could not say those things, but they recognized that what I had said, clearly it resonated, right?
Mm.
So that gave me hope that people are not as blind, deaf, and dumb as we tend to think.
But
And
they're afraid.
mostly people are afraid. Yes, they are afraid for their jobs, their livelihoods, for being,
Yes.
cast out, looked at, but they are thinking those things. And we see that now, that, I mean, that's true, right?
Yes. Because I always used to curse myself that when I get up to say anything that is a contradiction to what is being, said from a podium, and I get up and my voice is shaking, I'm almost, my eyesight is blurred, I'm so nervous, but I still managed to say it. But I cursed myself because I'm so fearful, but I say it anyways because the
Good.
authorizing environment is so punitive that it will not let you survive.
Mhm.
You shake the boat, or it will there'll be consequences in
Yes,
you can
yes.
the ladder until you realize the ladder is so unnecessary and you don't need it.
You said that. That's exactly right. I mean, as long as your sense of who you are in the world and what is important to you is not tied to those external markers of success, right? Or what the world sees as, you said, moving up the ladder, then you can be, less fearful. But it's not like the fear goes away. I mean, it's not like I never felt afraid or didn't think about consequences, because at the end of the day, of course, you want to be working, you need to be working, you need to make a living, you have to provide for your family, your children, your whatever. So I understand that fear, and I share part of it, but the other stuff was always so much more important to me, Maniza. Like, how is it? I mean, I would just get so befuddled and amazed that people were just saying things and utterly ignoring the elephant in the room. Like, how can this be? And I genuinely, naively believed that I had picked or gone into or chosen a profession where I could be free.
Mm.
I was not a banker. I was not a, whatever other professions where maybe you have to mind your P's and Q's. I mean, I was an academic. I was in a university. Universities are places where you have freedom of expression. That is what was taught. That is what I believed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was only behaving in the way that I thought was utterly appropriate as an academic.
And
So I was shocked when people would say these things. I genuinely was shocked. I'm like, what do you mean?
and you must have been
But,
so shocked by Susan Sontag's
oh
reaction.
God,
Someone
I
who
was
was hailed
amazed.
as being on the cutting edge of questioning and being progressive, but
I
no,
know it.
not at
Mm.
when it came.
No, not when it, it's that thing now, a lot of, I've come across this expression, people use it, PEP, progressive except for Palestine. And so many, really liberal, progressive Jewish intellectuals that I know, people in my profession, on my campus, in my department, and elsewhere, who have been good friends, with whom I agree on just about everything. But when it comes to Palestine, everything shuts down. It's like, what happened to you? Where did that person that I've known all these years?
And
Where has that person disappeared?
that is why even more amazing, astonishing, and wonderful, and worth all our respect and love to those young
Mm.
Jewish voices for peace who have really had a moral and ethical clarity on this and are waking everyone up.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it is astonishing, and it totally deserving of so much respect and admiration when you see that, because you can imagine how difficult it is for them, because they are constantly being called traitors, right? They are being called their anti-Zionism is being dubbed as sort of hatred against their own selves, they're self-hating Jews and all of that. But tens of thousands cannot be that, right? And like they're saying, as Naomi Klein also said
Yes,
not too long ago, right? She says, do not try to weaponize my Jewishness against me.
yes.
I won't allow it.
And these false gods that have been put up, that she says calls Zionism a false god, but also that these young people who have woken up, they've woken up because of the work of people like Norman Finkelstein and Noam
Of course.
Chomsky and Gabor Mate, and
Right.
who have so
Yeah,
diligently.
no, it's great. I mean, I was told not to invite Norman Finkelstein. I still went ahead and invited him. I mean, I have had people come to me and talk to me, my chairs, don't do this. This is not good. Trying to dissuade me, telling me, oh, he's an anti-Semite. He's not a scholar, and these are people I respect as scholars in their own rights, but they are blind when it comes to anyone criticizing the state of Israel. They can't stand it.
And the
They just
resentment,
can't. Suddenly, their intelligence goes to pot. Their
yes,
critical thinking ability goes to pot. But you have to stand firm, Maniza. That is what I found, and I have stood firm. But there has been a cost attached.
yes, of
I mean,
course.
right now I'm in a case against my, dean. I'm trying to figure out, because he accosted me at a public occasion. And I had taken my husband with me, Babar was with me, and I was introducing him to the dean, and the dean just turned around, glared at him, glared at me, and said, I don't want to talk to you. You are insulting. You have insulted us or insulted me. Your remarks are insulting. I'm like, huh? And I'm asking him, could you explain what you mean by that? And meanwhile, I mean, he's shouting at me in a room full of students and faculty.
When was this?
This was in February. And I said, please explain to me what remark you're talking about. What have I said or done or written that has insulted you so much that we can talk about it. And then maybe we'll see that there is a misunderstanding. What are you talking about? I have no idea. I don't wish to even talk to you. And he walked off.
Well,
I mean, he is my dean.
well, maybe it is his prerogative to do whatever he wants to, but and yours is to do what you want to. So, but all this shows, it just shows the moment we're in and how people are behaving rationally and irrationally. That moment has arrived, and there is no going back from this, because the children, the most important people, the children have woken up and they are able to differentiate between what is political, what is personal, and what is personal is political.
Mm-hmm. Amen to that. No, they are making those connections, Maniza, exactly those. And I think it's brilliant and really encouraging.
It is very, very encouraging. Let us talk about your book now, Fawzia, the book that the Little Book Company has published as an ebook, Traveling Feminista, which is one of our bestsellers. Please speak to that, as it's a memoir of your travels, but it does paint a picture of who you are and what you do and the things that you believe in.
Yes, I think that's correct, Maniza. And I think that this book has been in the works or in for a long, long time, because I have written these pieces over a period of almost, I would say, probably a couple of decades now, and so they started life as these sort of individual pieces, musings, thinking about the different places that I've visited, both in terms of places that I've gone to, and as a musician, as a performer, as a scholar, sometimes just for quote unquote pleasure, but for me, the pleasure also, what we call tourism, has never really been that. I'm not so interested in being a tourist. I'm always much more interested in what I call being a traveler, which is to say you really try to understand and connect with people in these areas, their histories, and then think about how that in a way enters your own sort of understanding of the world and helps to expand it, right? And how, in a way, we are all so connected across all of these different borders and countries and places. And so the physical travel, which is exciting and which brings us closer to people from here, over here to people over there, also then ends up connecting ideas and values, right? So I've had a chance to really think about those things. What is it that drives me? What is it that brings me into a shared connection with, let's say, these people that I met in Bosnia, who were from other parts of the world, who were there locally? What was their experience of that war? I know it's an area you have done a lot of work in. And when you start thinking about those connections, then it produces the kind of writing that, I'm hoping is speaking to your readers, in which the travel aspect of it is simply it's just the beginning of much deeper exploration. It is the spark to both self-discovery and the discovery of the world around you.
Beautifully said. Yes, beautifully said.
Mm,
And
You
how,
know, mhm.
go ahead.
No. I think I was just clearing my throat. I'm sorry.
How was the book received? I know that you had a book launch in Lahore and that you're about to have a book launch here in the United States.
Yeah. Yes, I'm very excited. I think people love sort of the idea of the book, and those who have bought it and have read it or read parts of it and have gotten back to me all say they really enjoyed it. A friend of mine wrote to me, and said it's just that they're really appreciating the style they find to be quite unique, and that it's allowing them to enter these different spaces and parts of the world, but through a much more it's not, it's an analytic lens, it's a historical lens, so they can connect in ways that let's say a magazine article, however fun and good it might be, may not, because I tend to go in depth into exploring sort of political ramifications, how they are tied to certain cultural aspects that a tourist might experience. I think I explored that a lot when I write about Belgrade. Sort of the guide who was there and his sort of prejudices against Turkish history. And so it becomes very interesting, or somebody who is really questioning the narratives that they have been fed, or in Belgrade, meeting women in black protesting, for human rights and for the rights of people who are immigrants. Within the country, and so to me, and I think to my readers now, they are finding that that is an interesting way to sort of read a travelogue, which is not which is a little bit deeper than most travelogues tend to be, and give them an idea of political histories and cultures in this light, which is not perhaps typically expected of travel writing. And so for me, the travel writing, as I also say in my preface, it's a way to travel inwards, right? It's not just external travel, but it is a travel of the mind, because when you do travel, your mind expands, and you can learn a lot by learning about what's happening out there. You can use it to go deeper and become a little more introspective and explore regions within yourself. And for me, when those two things, the external and internal, come together, I find that to be enriching. And I also think that readers find that enriching, because then they can see themselves in the writing. They may not have had the same experiences or even visited the same places, but they are able to connect the personal with the political. And I love that. And that is what I'm hearing from people who are reading the book.
That's wonderful. And with that, Fawzia, I think we'll conclude our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Maniza. It was a very rich conversation, and it was just so wonderful to be in conversation with you, because this is about people who get each other in a way, and hopefully it entices readers and your viewers and listeners to connect with the writing in a richer and a deeper way, and explore the other books that Little Book Company has been publishing, because really it's a wonderful venture. Like I say to people, oh my God, I'm so excited to be published by the equivalent of the Virginia Woolf and the Hogarth Press of Pakistan. Not that one reduces things to that, but in a way what you are doing is is fabulous, and I think it's really important. And you are your own thing and your own person, and this is your own its own press. But yeah, it does remind me of that kind of venture that Woolf and the Hogarth Press did for writers in England at that time. So I'm very excited to be one of your authors.
Well, thank you so much. And might I just interest you or request you for another song to close us out?
Well, let's see. I mean, I would have to
Anything at all that you might want to sing to us as we go. Are you thinking about it, Fawzia?
Not quite sure what happened there, but I can sing you a bit of the ghazal that I have often sung for you if you're not too tired of listening to
Oh,
it.
no, please.
So this is also something that I think was one of the first ghazals I ever learned, and from our fabulous poet of the subcontinent, Mirza Ghalib, and also very meaningful, like all our poetry is. So anyway, I'm just going to sing a little bit from there. बाजी चाहे अतफाल है दुनिया मेरे आगे होता है शबो रोज तमाशा मेरे आगे बाजी चाहे अतफाल है गो हाथ में जुम्बिश आँखों में तो दम है जो रहने दो अभी सागरो मीना मेरे आगे रहने दो अभी सागरो मीना मेरे आगे बाजी चाहे अतफाल है दुनिया मेरा गे होता है शबो रोज तमाशा मेरे आगे बाजी चाहे अतफाल
Wow.
Well, two old songs, and I hope that your listeners enjoy it. And I'm so happy that you asked me to sing. It's such an important and integral part of who I am. So I do enjoy it whenever I get a chance to be that person, Maniza.
You are that person, Fawzia, all the time. Thank you.
You are
Thank you
You are
so
kind.
much.
You are so kind, and thank you. And by the way, just for your audience again, so John Lawrence was, after whom that Lawrence Garden was first named, was the Viceroy of India from 1864 to 1869. So he was very much an imperially important a guy of the imperial empire of Britain. Yeah. So it was fitting, right, that we deconstructed another Lawrence in that Lawrence's hall. I thought that was quite interesting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anyway, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be on your podcast, and inshallah we'll talk again. Thank you.
Thank you, Fawzia.
Bye-bye.
Bye.